13 years have passed since we left Kate Walker standing on the island of Syberia. Hans Vorarlberg had completed his lifelong journey in more ways than one. While the sick old man finally got to take a ride on the back of a mammoth, we knew all too well at that point that his health was declining rapidly, and even if he'd wanted to, there was no coming back for him. The ending was everything we'd worked for, and there didn't need to be any more. Even so, 13 years later in 2017, we finally got Syberia 3. God damn, 2017. That was my third year in Japan. I still had my dinky little box apartment that got filled with cockroaches in the summer, and was still working in my first job here. It feels really strange that that's almost a quarter of my life ago now. Anyway, what were we talking about? Prey 2017. Okay, great. Wait, no, Syberia 3, right? The game itself wasn't all that well received, and I can fully understand why people felt this wasn't just a disappointment for the series, but also just not a very fun game to play at all. However, rather than the series ending with a whimper instead of a bang, Microids and Benoît Sokal took the feedback to heart and got back into Unity and got cooking. The output of that extended development cycle was Syberia The World Before, a game that very much feels like a post-Life is Strange narrative adventure game that delivered hard on the story and visuals and went in an interesting direction with the series' trademark puzzles. I have to tell you guys, I'd originally written Remember Me in the script instead of Life is Strange. You know, that Don't Nod Capcom cyberpunk parkour game about changing people's memories? So underrated. I really need to cover that on here one day. While none of the Syberia games have been AAA affairs that had all the money to back them up, they've always been ambitious and sought to grow beyond their limitations to deliver powerful and emotional narratives. And that is something that was definitely back in The World Before. I really can't wait to start telling you all about it. I had more than one comment in my first video from fans who had absolutely no idea it had even happened, which leaves me wondering if Microids needs to up their marketing game a little. Sadly though, Benoît Sokal passed away before the release of the last entry in the Kate Walker saga. But I think he would have been very happy with the output, and I think just about everyone who played it felt it was a phenomenal return to form for the series. It would be hard to recapture the magic of those first two games, even if we imposed the same limitations on ourselves that those studios had to work with at the time. Nostalgia is definitely part of it because, let's be honest, those pixel hunting puzzles were kind of ass. But it was the total package that brought the magic to the game. I wonder, if someone were to recreate the game in Unreal Engine today, if it would be more fun or less. Even so, this game is probably about as close as modern developers will get to achieving the magic of those first two. And if one day I have to eat those words, I assure you, I will be more than happy to. But before we talk about why that is, well, we've got to deal with something a little less fun. And that is Syberia 3. Syberia 1 and 2 released a matter of a couple of years apart, and are basically one game cut in half. Had the first game not sold well enough to warrant financing a sequel, the ending that saw Kate Walker finally cast away her life in New York City and fully embrace that of wild adventure in a dreamlike world would have been good enough. While Hans' journey to see the mammoths would have been left unresolved, it's very clear that this physical journey is playing second fiddle to the journey of self-discovery that Kate Walker is undertaking. Still, we got our part 2, and the entire narrative was wrapped up in a satisfying way. We can assume that after taking Hans to see the mammoths, Kate Walker somehow returned to the Youkols village, and was maybe able to ride the train back to Romansburg to whatever her next adventure might be. Private Detective Nick Canton had also declared that he was giving up on the hunt for our runaway lawyer, and a future of infinite possibilities was laid out for our heroine to explore. While Benoît Sokal remained in the world of video games, he decided to explore other stories and other worlds for a while. In 2003, he co-founded Whitebird Studios, which put out a couple of point-and-click adventures that received, overall, middling review scores. The studio was closed in 2010 due to financial difficulties that stemmed from an unpaid-for, cancelled project. Still, he had never given up on the idea of returning to the world he created back when he made Amazon, and he certainly thought that Kate Walker had a few more adventures left to take us all on. According to this interview on the Microids YouTube channel, it was when he saw his son play Assassin's Creed that he started to think the world of gaming had caught up with his vision of what he wanted to create. Syberia 1 and 2 were both low-budget early 2000s games, and while within the confines of what was possible with the available resources, they created a beautiful world and told a rich and wonderful story, Benoît wanted to do more. Documentation on Syberia 3 is somewhat limited, and I'd really like to know more about what happened with this development. The Wikipedia article mentions the game was originally announced in 2009 with an original release date of sometime in 2010. This of course didn't happen, and there were a lot of changes going on in the background with Microids being acquired by another parent company and money for the game's development not being released. Things apparently weren't ironed out until 2014, and the game itself didn't drop until 2017. This feels like something of a development hell story. It seems like they announced the project prematurely and then just got stuck in contract negotiations and boring corporate red tape for a long time, and a lot of people were sitting around twiddling their thumbs and wondering when they'll actually be able to start working. Since there isn't a great deal of information on the internet about this, I'd rather not speculate or lay blame on anything in particular, but this isn't exactly the first story of this kind that we've heard, is it? If I had to sum up Syberia 3 in one word, that word would be rough. If you gave me a few words, I'd say ambitious and rough. The game is, well, it's kind of a mess. How much of a mess, you say? Enough for me to not want to replay the whole game for capture and try to figure out a way to keep this part as brief as possible, while also highlighting the important beats that went on to turn the next game into such a triumph. Here's hoping I succeed. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Syberia 3's story sees Kate Walker return from the titular island and become reunited with the Youkols tribe. These guys have been somewhat retconned from a group of people living permanently in the northern reaches of Syberia and clinging to a way of life that hasn't changed since the time of the mammoths, to a semi-nomadic tribe that eventually replaced their codependency on mammoths with snow ostriches. I checked, they're not real. They're another creation of Benoît and his writing team, and unique to this strange world that exists only a small sidestep from our own. This is okay. We only spent a very brief time with the Youkols in the second game, and there was no reason for the people who were lecturing us, in one case quite literally, on their culture to bring up anything about their modern existence. So maybe all the snow ostriches were just in another cave around the time of our last visit. In our opening cutscene, we see that the Youkols found Kate Walker freezing and delirious from her attempt to return from the mythical island of the last mammoths. Their beliefs are that the spirits guided them to her, and they did everything in their power to keep her alive before transferring her to a clinic in the town of Valsambor that exists somewhere. Similar to Borokstadt University and other colourful locations we encountered in the first games, it's not a real place, more an idea of a place that people can kind of guess where it is based on architecture, fashion, culture, etc. These kinds of locations are going to be a big deal in the next game, so I thought it was worth bringing up here. We also get this ominous scene where the, doctor at the clinic is communicating with some kind of Russian big boss guy. The way they're talking implies they know something about Kate Walker that she doesn't, and that it would be in everyone's best interest if she was detained indefinitely. I call this scene ominous because, while it implies some darker plot that we're going to have to contend with, it's also just bad. I'll dissect the cliche character design and the bad voice acting later, but this whole thing just made me cringe and was the first sign that the game wasn't going to live up to the last two by a long way. After getting some good old-fashioned Western medicine in her system, Kate Walker awakens, apparently prematurely, in a bed in this somewhat shabby-looking clinic in a room that she shares with a young Youkols man. This is Kirk, and he's both here to act as our tutorial guy and exposition guy. He brings Kate Walker up to speed on how the Youkols are undertaking a rare pilgrimage to the breeding grounds of their ostrich herds. This is an event that takes place around every 20 to 30 years or so, and is something of a big deal for everyone and everything involved. Since the Youkols now depend on the ostriches in the same way they did the mammoths, when the big birds want to get up and go get jiggy, the entire clan has to pack up and go with them. Unfortunately, soldiers from the local regime, what kind of regime isn't specified but inferred from our probable geographic location, bombed roads because
they think that the snow ostrich migration has no place in today's world, and that my tribe should settle down once and for all.
Which is fairly weak-ass motivation if I'm being honest. But hey, it's the start of the game. We don't know exactly what our enemies' motivations are, or what it is they know about Kate Walker, or it's a nothing burger, guys. Yeah, this whole plot thread goes absolutely nowhere, and not only doesn't add anything special to the story, it proactively subtracts from it by highlighting just how bad the writing is this time. They also clearly realize just how bad they fucked this one up, because the whole arc gets abandoned as quickly as possible in the next game, in a way that leaves you asking even more questions than you had before. That being said, you're so happy it's over and done with, you just move on. Yeah, this is actually why I didn't want to talk too much about this game. It doesn't take too long for the bile to come out. You know what? Fuck it. So, Planescape Torment is a 1999 CRPG made in the Infinity engine.
Not funny. Not even a little bit.
Okay, come on, let's get this done. So Kirk is the guide for the current migration, as chosen by the spirits, but he's unable to do his job until he gets a prosthetic leg that's apparently being made by a local master craftsman. He's also being restrained in what looks like some kind of elaborate pain chair that shoots sedatives into his system at regular intervals. Where do I get me one of these? So since she's up and about, we get a small tutorial puzzle to help Kate Walker get out of the room, and that's where things get weird. An event in the recent history of Valsimvor was a nuclear meltdown that took place in a reactor in a place called Baranor. This is another town located on the other side of the lake that had an entire amusement park attached to it. The event created an exclusion zone filled with all kinds of mutants and weird anomalies where the laws of physics just break down. Wait, sorry, wrong game. But you can see the comparison with Chernobyl, right? You can see a lot of patients who have what look like tumors and radiation burns, and there's more than a little psychological trauma going around in this ward. Still, when treatment looks like this... polygraphs. More pseudoscience bullshit. You can't blame the patients if their recovery is a little stunted. So yeah, between creepy doctors and less than conventional treatment methods, this is starting to feel more like one of those horror movies where someone thinks they've been wrongfully admitted into a mental health clinic, and doesn't know if they're actually being paranoid, or if the staff really are out to get them. Still, when we are given a key for the elevator and told that all we have to do is solve its puzzle to use it, and that key turns out to be missing an important component and will never work no matter what we do, well, the paranoia starts to feel real. Thanks to a very clever owl and Youkols craftsmanship though, we are able to escape the upper floors, only to discover that the funicular, one of these things, that should ship us quickly down to the town, has been shut down, and we overhear orderlies saying that they may have to deal with a very disturbing new patient. We do get to meet Dr. Zamiatin. This guy is actually the head of this clinic and seems like a straight up guy who's just got his head buried in the sand regarding Olga Efimova. Well, I guess she must be doing something to actually help her patients sometimes, right? Now this clinic is actually built into an old fort that's riddled with secret passages, which is actually how we make our underground escape, but not before we find Dr. Olga Efimova and her fiendish sidekick pouring diesel into the water to contaminate the absolutely massive river. So I guess they've got an entire shipping freight's worth stashed in their basement. And poison the ostriches. Oh, and we also get a video call from Nick Canton. We last heard of this guy in Syberia 2 when he wound up trapped in a hunter's lodge 1,000 miles from anywhere with a hungry grizzly bear stalking around outside. While he decided to cry uncle at that moment, he's not only back on Kate Walker's trail, but this is no longer a simple rescue mission anymore.
The feds are looking for me? But what's the charge? I've done nothing wrong.
Embezzlement! Apparently you took off with the contract for the sale of the clockwork toy factory in Vorarlberg.
Too bad she can't just post that contract back to Mr. Marsden. These people only care about the money. So we use this dam to filter the water and go visit the Youkols shaman for a long time no see beer. It's here we basically get our first list of objectives. We've got to get Kirk's prosthesis to him somehow, and then think of some way to cross the lake to Baranor, the place where the nuclear meltdown happened. Normally, the migration just walks across the frozen lake, but due to climate change, the lake hasn't frozen this year, and there may or may not be an actual kraken in the lake too. Wait, is there? Yes there is. But there's also the much more devilish problem of paperwork and red tape before we can even leave the camp and go on the adventure. So our primary stakes are established. Kate Walker, feeling indebted to the Youkols, and while dodging a private detective and an eye-patched reject from one of the bad Indiana Jones movies, is going to try and help them navigate a world of corrupt politicians and medical professionals, something they blissfully have very little experience with. and barter passage on a ship so they can continue their great pilgrimage and protect their way of life from the powerful forces that would rather they just settle down and start paying taxes or something. It's not a bad hook. It lacks some of the childlike wonder that the first two games had, but we're already getting sucked into Sokal's strange alternative Earth, and some of those early puzzles showed a lot of promise. Unfortunately, it is more or less all downhill from here, guys. Not entirely. There is one really interesting character, and we do become reunited with Oscar, but this game, it's a slog. Our problems arise once we get control of Kate Walker in the clinic and realise that the controls are not very responsive. Collision boxes seem to be several times too big, and I have no idea what's going on with these choppy animations. I don't know if it's a frame rate issue or what, but there's nothing particularly smooth about the way we move around our environments. One area that really throws all this into sharp focus is a later section where we're dealing with an emergency on a ship. We need to smash a bunch of lights all over the deck, and Kate Walker is just jogging awkwardly around the place and going through tediously slow animations to climb onto boxes. Like, this is a woman who in the last game free climbed a lethal rock face, struggling to get onto a box. Also, stairs in this game are a massive pain. Just getting close to them will initiate the slow walk upstairs animation, whether you were planning to go up the things or not. Oh, and they really should have used classic tank controls here, because every time there's a tracking shot in this game, you wind up moving way off course because of it. So just getting around is a mild irritation that is going to build up throughout the entire game. Syberia 3 has point and click controls, but this really feels like a legacy feature kept in to keep the long-term fans happy, and not the preferred method of play. On my first playthrough, I went through a good chunk of the opening chapter with point and click controls, before getting frustrated and just switching to a controller. This way, you'll get lots of contextual button prompts to help you navigate through the game's systems and puzzles. However, rotating objects in your inventory will go up to warp speed. I'm low-key wondering if there's some frame rate issue, similar to what we had with Syberia 2 at work here. But there are almost zero graphical settings that you can play with to try and fix any of these problems. So, I guess we just gotta live with it? Now, our environments are once again the highlight of the show. While technology had progressed and the size of the team that worked on Syberia 3 was likely considerably bigger than the one that built the first two games, this was no doubt a AA game that was looking to recapture some of the original's magic that led to it punching way above its weight class. The game was built in the Unity engine, and 2017 was firmly in the 8th generation of consoles. So our environments have gone from these gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds to full 3D locations rocking normal maps and full PBR materials to help create a more realistic looking world. Still, it's very clear that the artists, especially the character artists, weren't going for an ultra-realistic look in this game, and were looking to tell just as much of a story with their visuals as they were anything else. Valsenborg, similar to other locations we visited in previous games, has this trapped in the past kind of vibe to it. The old European architecture and overcast weather that makes me think of the country I grew up in all create something of a dreary vibe. One touch that I really like are the piles of snow that are stacked up around the streets. In Syberia 2 we got lush, perfectly white snow that created a winter wonderland. Here, the snow is just an annoyance to the locals who have to move it out of their streets so that they can get on with their lives. It's dirty and compacted and just shoved to one side. Aside from the clinic, there are only two other locations we visit in this area though. The first being a nice old-timey pub, and the second being Mr. Steiner's workshop. The workshop inspires wonderful nostalgia for the first couple of games, for obvious reasons. And it's no surprise at all to discover that Mr. Steiner is familiar with both the works and person of Hans Vorarlberg. My point is, this is all very charming. The Youkols camp feels very warm and cozy, and provides a sense of safety, especially Kate's personal yurt. I gotta get me one of these too. The town has a similar vibe to many of the places we've already visited, and this is the part they absolutely nailed. Baranor is likewise interesting and creepy in equal measure, both the abandoned amusement park and the parts of the town itself that we actually get to see. So the environment art is mostly a win, and might be one of the biggest reasons to not skip this game if you really don't want to. The big difference here is that, while all the locations in these games have had this old forgotten vibe, the third game's locations are less wondrous and more creepy, and I think that's where some of the magic is lost. The character models and textures are fine overall, Kate Walker has honestly never looked better, and voice actress Sharon Mann makes a much welcome return as the New York lawyer turned nomad in this game. However, it's when they start to talk that the problems arrive. All of these characters are suffering from severe facial paralysis, and it's a problem that's made even more prominent by the close-up camera angles that are used during the conversations. Because of the technological limitations of the first two games, most conversations took place using only a couple of pulled-out camera angles. After all, were they to get too up close and personal, we'd notice very quickly how low poly these models were and how low resolution these textures are. Since texture maps could be anything from 1 to 2K at this point, and each character would have multiple textures, it's possible to bring the camera in close and show off the good work. Unfortunately, the mouth movement is on a level with Shenmue, and as a 3D artist myself, I can practically see the topology of the mouth stretching and contracting. This is also because the lip syncing is really bad. Microids are a French-based publisher, and the first two games were developed in a Montreal studio, so my guess is this was all done in French first and localized later, but for whatever reason, money I'm guessing, the lip files weren't updated to match the different languages. Another thing to note here is that if you read the subtitles, you'll find massive discrepancies there too. So maybe the cast were just jazzing their lines a little, and no one was paid enough to add those updates in. Also, while Kate Walker and especially this guy Captain Oboe are absolutely knocking it out of the park with their performances, the vast majority of the cast are not pulling their weight on this one. And there's a huge writing issue here too, with characters doing massive awkward exposition dumps, and then another character reiterating the same thing, like, listen to this super smooth insertion of information that might be useful for later.
Grandfather, I know you're still really angry with Captain Oboe because he abandoned the automatons that you built with your friend Hans and Baranor. He was supposed to wait for them. They were going to take all the survivors they found in the rubble to the boat and then bring everyone here to safety in Valsambor. But in the end, when he got to the beach at Baranor and saw the disaster and all the dead, he became really afraid. The disease, the radiation. He must have had an uncontrollable panic attack, so he immediately turned back, dumped the machines on the crystal into the lake, and came back empty-handed to Valsambor. And the automatons have been there ever since, in hell.
Yeah, it's not just those facial animations that make me think of my early adventures in Yokosuka, looking for sailors.
Saijo-san, do you know any places where sailors like to hang out around here?
So from a good point to a bad point, let's swing back around to a good point, and try to keep things balanced. I really like Syberia 3's puzzles. This particular evolution of the narrative adventure genre is a big positive. I think the puzzles in The World Before are even better though, so we'll dive into the how and why of it in more detail there. The gist of it is though, rather than puzzles being a simple matter of bring correct object to correct obstruction and use it to clear the path, now we have to actually go through a larger series of steps to use it. In Syberia 1, there was a great example of this when we needed to get some papers stamped so that Oscar would release the train to us, but the pre-rendered environments meant the level of interaction was pretty basic. Whether as an intentional callback or not, an early puzzle in Syberia 3 is also focused on getting a document stamped so we can be on our merry way. Pixel hunting is long gone at this point, and interactable areas are highlighted with simple UI elements. We still have to actually open our inventory and choose the correct item to use at this stage though. So, to get our paper stamped we first need to get the documents from one of the locals, get a copy of the stamp, which means asking a Youkols craftsman to make one, but he needs wax for the mold and a reference image. Then when we put it all together, we see that the ink sponge is dry, so we have to go find some ink somewhere. Yes, we use the ink from a dead squid. And finally, assemble all these pieces and actually operate the mechanism with various contextual button prompts to get things done. This sort of thing was introduced in various David Cage games before now, so I'd say they learnt the right lessons from those. I found these puzzles to be overall very satisfying. That doesn't mean there aren't a few bad ones. This roller coaster puzzle here, for example, requires you to figure out the exact position to place some metal rods to force the car to stop at the correct spot. But if you mess up, you're going to have to ride the roller coaster all the way to the end to find out. A total waste of time. Lastly, I'd say with the exception of the very last puzzle, which is this completely absurd Youkols smoke machine that we somehow have to turn on, none of them are especially challenging. Going back to the first two games, one of my complaints was about a lack of clear motivation to reach our goals. This seemed like the trade-off necessary to let the player feel like they're exploring and unlocking the mysteries of their environments and progressing the story. Well, now things have gone way too far in the other direction, with every single little objective being laid out for you step by step, and little to no chance for you to get ahead and feel like you got one up on the game. There are times when this makes perfect sense. An early series of challenges in Valsambor see you helping out to prepare a ship to take the Youkols across the lake. The captain tells you what you need to do, and you run out there and do it before coming back to get your next job. So in this situation, of course you aren't going to be taking care of the water tanks or putting on your diving suit when the only thing you've been asked to do is take care of the coal. But as the game progresses, it sort of starts to feel like you're really being taken for a ride here. Every time there is a small problem, it seems like Kate Walker is the only one who can save the day. This makes sense in Valsambor at least. Most Youkols come to this place maybe twice in their entire lives, so having a westernized lawyer around to help with cultural barriers seems like a good idea. But later in the game, I couldn't help but feel like I was just having my good nature taken advantage of. Worst of all, it makes the Youkols seem like helpless children. Sure, they're fish out of water in the concrete jungle, but this is a clan that lives and survives in one of the harshest environments on the planet, and built all of this. This is their pilgrimage, and while the world certainly has changed, I'd hope they could figure out how to wipe their own arses while on their most sacred of journeys, and not need me to hold their hand while they do it. There's a scene towards the end of the game, just before the final bridge, where our exhausted heroine is trying to sleep in her yurt, and then the procession grinds to a halt and she's like, "God damn, what is it now?" And I was right there with her. Like, can we just get this damn pilgrimage over with? So, points for trying for sure, but they definitely swung the needle too far in the opposite direction this time. It was the villains of the piece, and especially their involvement at the end, that really set me against this game. Had these two people not been in the game, and this one been used correctly, things would be elevated from the level of something I begrudge having installed on my computer and replaying for capture, to a charming but flawed third entry that was okay but fell short of what came before it. Like, seriously guys, I am going through my first full playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 right now, and it was just such a drag firing this up to try and push a little further through an adventure that I wasn't invested in, while Astarion is trying to riz me left, right and centre, and the best steppy dommy mommy since Lady D is hanging out half naked in my camp. I honestly don't know how people play games or watch movies that they hate to make angry review content about them. Like, when you're on your death's bed looking back at how you spent your time, are you really going to think this was the best thing you could have done with it? Each to their own, I guess. So, what is the crime of these would-be villains, you ask? Well, being the blandest, most 2D cardboard cutout stereotypes you could possibly imagine, and having absolutely zero motivation for their actions. Well, nothing that makes sense anyway. The area we're travelling through is ruled by some kind of regime that, for some reason, don't want the Youkols taking their sacred pilgrimage through their land, and certainly don't want an American lawyer turned adventurer helping them achieve this. Their entire motivation for this is they think the Youkols' way of life is kind of cringe, and they're a minor inconvenience to Valsambor for about 2 days every 20 to 30 years or so. In fact, they're taking this threat to the life and liberty of their people so seriously that they can easily spare, like, a whole helicopter and 3 guys with guns they never fire to take care of it. They also feel the need to fly this doctor around with them everywhere they go because, I don't know, maybe Captain Eyepatch has a thing for short-haired dominatrix types? I cannot wrap my head around what the fuck is going on with these people at all.
But Arkham,
I hear you say through flabbergasted lips.
Didn't you say regime? Isn't that just code for commie Nazis or something?
So, skipping ahead to the 4th game, yes, these guys are the Sokal versus Nazis, and no, that still doesn't excuse their actions. Have you heard of Show Don't Tell? I mean, the New Order were like even more evil Nazis too, and they still went out of their way to make sure I understood what it was they wanted, and that I hated everything about them, especially Death's Head. We will have a reckoning, sir. God, Brian Bloom is so fucking good as BJ. Anyway. Saying these guys are fascists, ergo they hate things, is the same as having a villain whose plan is batshit insane and impossible to follow, and saying, well, he's crazy, of course it'll be completely random. Ignoring all the way more interesting ways you could write a villain who has serious mental health problems, you have to be a damn good writer to pull that off. Your audience isn't going to become invested in characters or a story if they're just being fucked around at every turn, only to have the payoff being, well, of course it wasn't going to make any sense. I'm not saying it can't be done well, but it's very easy to do badly. But what about the other villains in these games? You continue to splutter. Weren't they just two-dimensional characters too? Isn't that just par for the course for these games? Those characters fitted the markedly different tone of those games. Sergei seemed almost self-aware of how absurd he was, while Ivan got under my skin with his slights and spiteful behavior. He likewise trashed my cozy little mobile home and nearly killed one of my friends in the process. These are relatable actions that would piss me off in the real world too, and I can understand people shitting on each other for the sake of a payday. But I don't even know what the politics of these guys are beyond eye patches and no sacred pilgrimages. Likewise, this game is just a bit darker, and seems to be trying to be a touch more mature.
But, Kate Walker, my clothes. I don't have any clothes.
I said a touch, so bland caricatures aren't going to cut it. Olga Efimova, who is always referred to by her full name in the most cringe way possible, could have been interesting if they were going to stretch out the hospital section further, and maybe have Kate uncover evidence of patient abuse or illegal testing, or anything that would have made sense. As far as I can tell though, she actually is treating most of the patients in the ward we wake up in, and just occasionally reports to, I don't even know this guy's name, to inform him of mysterious American travelers. Once we've escaped Valsambor though, I don't know what the hell she's doing here. Villains are supposed to challenge the hero. They're supposed to raise the stakes and demonstrate how our heroes are progressing and becoming more competent in order to tackle the escalating threats. Any Shonen Jump manga will demonstrate this. Kate Walker isn't some powerhouse who solves her problems with her fists. She's a lawyer who has to think her way through her various challenges. In that regard, Sergei and Igor weren't much of a threat to her, and she easily overpowers them in the end. But this Kate has come through the first part of her development. She's broken away from her life in New York and returned from completing her quest to Syberia. You'd think soldiers from an oppressive regime would be a real threat for her to contend with, but they're just incompetent Saturday morning cartoon villains who can be outrun by a Youkol with a prosthetic leg and won't even fire a warning shot. Like, do you guys know what rucking is? Do you know how hard that shit is? And that's army basic training. What the hell is wrong with these guys? But honestly, for me, the most disappointing part was this guy right here. Detective Nick Canton is the best private investigator on the west coast of the USA. He's the bloodhound that Kate's law firm's sick on her in the second game. He claims he always gets his man, or woman I guess. So he should have been the real antagonist here. He's a man of potential equal intellect to Kate Walker, but in a different field. He could have been laying all kinds of traps and distractions for her. They could have had epic banter as they slowly came to understand they were battling not just an enemy, but a nemesis, before Nick ultimately realized that Kate isn't the criminal he'd been led to believe, and respectfully takes the blemish to his reputation to give up the chase and return home without her, maybe even helping her get the Youkols to their final destination along the way. Instead, we get an awkward, overweight guy with an absurdly wide nose, who easily gets tripped over and his documents stolen by Youkols. Not all the character writing is bad though. Well, this girl is just, you know what, just forget about it. If you don't know, you're better off not. Captain Obo is one of the best additions to our cast of colourful characters that we meet in these games. He's something of a drunken disgrace when we first encounter him. In the aftermath of the nuclear meltdown in Baranor, a large procession of Oscar-style automatons were hastily prepared at some factory somewhere, and loaded up onto Captain Obo's ship to be taken out there to look for and bring any survivors back. The idea being that automatons wouldn't have to worry about radiation poisoning. However, while he was out there waiting for their return, the captain caught sight of a kraken-like monster in the water and got so scared that he abandoned his rescue plans, raised anchor, and fled back to Valsambor, leaving any potential survivors to die out there. The Dark Spirit of the Lake, as the Youkols call it, seems to be a well-known urban legend in the area, with everyone having some story or another of a guy who knew a guy who was dragged to their doom by a giant monster. However, it seems that the powers that be are actually aware that the lake really is home to some Loch Ness kaiju-esque creature, as they have these massive gates that not only serve to keep ships in harbour when they don't want them to leave, but also to keep the beast out at night. Apparently they've kept the creature as little more than a myth and a town mascot in order to avoid panic. It's not quite as bad as what people in the Lost Village were doing, I suppose, but it still ranks pretty high on the stupid places video game NPCs choose to settle chart. So after panicking and turning tail over what most people consider a folktale, Obo was branded a pariah and decided that he'd rather live out his days in the oblivion found at the bottom of a bottle. Kate Walker has to deal with him in order to get the Youkols passage across the lake, and while in the grand scheme of the game we don't actually spend that much time with him, he is easily one of the most memorable characters who goes through this full redemption arc that sees him pull himself together to get his ship working again, while still teetering on the edge of total relapse.
I've made a complete mess of everything again. Again.
Being thrust back into the one place he'd sworn he'd never return, and having the most awesome climactic last stand against the thing that destroyed his life and plagued his nightmares ever since. I was genuinely moved watching him row out into the lake to draw the beast away and give the Youkols a fair chance at escape, and I thoroughly enjoyed this whole section of the game. They also clearly spent the rest of the voice acting budget on Mick Pollock, most famously known for his performance as Dr. Robotnik, to voice him. Or if they did get him for the same price as some of the robotic performers that make up the rest of the cast, they really underpaid him. I think an honourable mention should go to Katrina... How the hell do I say that? Drozdilova. Katrina Drozdilova. She's a survivalist woman we find living in a cute subway car turned homestead beneath Baranor Amusement Park. Since we get to explore her personal living space, we can pick up so much about her in only a brief time. She was an Olympic shot put gold medalist, and the runner-up in a beauty contest. I mean, I don't believe in objective beauty standards, and we were all someone else once, so whatever, right? She and her husband Andre were survivors who were left behind after the meltdown when Captain Obo's ship, the Crystal, sailed away. While Katrina survived, her husband was already too far gone and died of radiation sickness. She also heard a rumour, probably on this radio here that she uses to listen to soap operas, that the survivors who did make it back to Valsenborg were admitted to a clinic and never discharged. So she lives her life here with her clockwork dog, where she can be free to hunt game and be close to her husband. She doesn't have as big of an impact as our good captain, but she's another forgotten soul added to the list of forgotten souls we've encountered on our journey. I've already spent far more time than I'd like talking about this game. I hope I've done a good job of offsetting a lot of my complaints by highlighting the positive aspects too. I don't really think I can recommend this one to you, all things considered though. If you've played everything, including Amazon, and you really just need more Kate Walker and this world, then you'll probably get something out of it. You'll likewise get the complete picture of how Kate Walker went from seeing hands-off on the Isle of Syberia at the end of the second game, to slaving away in a forced labour gulag at the start of The World Before. I guess the other big highlight is the return of Oscar. We had thought our best clockwork bro was all but lost after his true purpose was revealed at the end of the second game. However, we learn early in this game that Oscar's memories are actually kept in his heart, and Kate Walker needs only insert it into a compatible automaton to be reunited with him. It turns out just such an automaton can be found in the amusement park in Baranor. We actually get to play a short section of the game as him too, and the DLC is focused entirely on him as it concerns a period in the journey when Nick Canton finally catches up to Kate and spirits her away in the night. We essentially end with the Youkols racing to cross a bridge into the Sacred Lands, while the regime is only a matter of minutes away. Oscar is left behind to operate the bridge, but when something goes wrong, Kate rushes back to try and help him, and while she succeeds in thwarting the regime's plans to... Seriously, I still have no idea what their fucking problem is. She's flown off in their helicopter along with Dr. Olga to whatever ominous fate awaits her in the future. I found this ending to be thoroughly disappointing and frankly, just stupid. It's not a bad way to end the game exactly, but these dollar store Nazis basically did nothing for the entire game, and I'm somehow supposed to think it's some dramatic ending that'll hook me into the next game, just like at the end of the first one. Nah, this ain't it fam. This ain't it at all. It honestly feels like this story had massive sections chopped out of it. Numerous characters and events are missing context and really need to be fleshed out more, which when you combine that with the lengthy and troubled development cycle, the choppy controls and frame rates, the subpar voice acting and facial paralysis, well, this is starting to look like a game that got stuck in development hell for a long time and pushed out prematurely because someone just didn't want to spend any more money on it. Maybe they thought the brand alone was enough to carry it, and have people overlook the rough edges. or that a reunion with Kate Walker and Oscar would blind fans to how empty and unpolished the rest of the experience is. You know, like how that one movie with the cool blue CGI people managed to trick a massive audience into thinking it wasn't really unoriginal derivative and mostly boring. This really ain't it at all. The reviews speak for themselves, and while I've no doubt the hardcore series fans were happy to at least see their favourite characters return, and get some more information on what came next for Kate Walker, everyone felt this was a step down from the lightning in a bottle perfect storm of elements that made those first two games such classics. Sales reflected the response, and in most situations, this would be the end of the series. Microids certainly aren't the worst of the worst when it comes to publishing, but they are a for-profit company at the end of it all, and if something misses hard and tarnishes the reputation of a brand, well, they may want to look elsewhere for their future projects. So we were all more than a little surprised to discover that after Syberia 3, Microids didn't just want another crack at the whip, they were coming back hard to celebrate the series' 20th anniversary, and they meant business. Syberia The World Before began development in 2017, not long after the release of the third installment, and given what an absolute banger of a game it is, we can safely say that the team took a lot of the criticism to heart and used it to drastically overhaul their approach to this one. We've been singing Benoît Sokal's praises left, right and centre since we started talking about the first game, but we have a new name and a face that we need to highlight here, that being Lucas Lagravete. Lucas actually came on board with Syberia 3 and worked as the co-writer with Benoît, but he was elevated to lead writer and game director for this one. He's been quite happy to come forward and do a few interviews for numerous magazines and YouTube channels, and I was low-key thinking about reaching out with a few questions myself, but given he just finished work as creative director on the Amazon remake, and there's some bad news being rumoured about his studio, I think it's safe to say he has his attention very much elsewhere. Lucas has a master's in screenwriting and audiovisual writing. See? Those degrees aren't just for people looking to avoid paying taxes for a few years. And began his career with Microids working on Agatha Christie ABC Murders. I've got to say that as both a developer and a publisher, Microids have some great games under their belt. Robin Hood, those Dracula games, Still Life. You know, I might have to give this Flint game a try too. I know it's got mixed reviews on Steam, but it does look right up my alley. So Lucas was 12 when the first game came out, which makes him about 10 years younger than me. He's also noticeably more handsome, has a mastery of English language that surpasses my Japanese by far, and he no doubt has a higher salary than me. Bro doesn't look like he lifts much though, so I guess I've got that. In this interview here, when he's asked about which entry in the series captured him at first, he talked about how the opening cutscene of the first game really sucked him in, much like it did for myself and I suspect most of the people watching here. It's only a few well-placed camera angles, observing a bizarre funeral procession, but it sums up so much about what the game is about. This is very much something they wanted to nail in this game too, and as we'll soon discover, they succeeded with style. So there was definitely a lot of pressure for the younger writer coming in to help with not only an established brand with a dedicated fanbase and something of a big name attached to it, but one he personally enjoyed growing up with himself. Lucas, however, rose to the challenge, and while the release of the first game was a disappointment for everyone, he didn't let that hold him back from taking another crack at things. A lot of the design process was refined this time around. It seems they were using a much older version of Unity when making the third game, which they updated to the most recent version when they began development on the next. They'd also added pressure to themselves by wanting to release the games on both PC and consoles at the same time. This had led to the controller support getting a lot more attention than the point and click controls, which was apparently a sore point for some returning players. So The World Before released for PC first, and was designed so that point and click controls and controllers were equally viable options. Also, the considerably shorter development cycle of around 5 years implies a much less turbulent process, and they also released a prologue chapter as a demo from which they got a lot of player feedback. Larian have been doing this with early access for their games since the first Divinity Original Sin, and we all know how that story went.
And the game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3.
By the time of the game's release, the core development team had been transformed into Microids Studio Paris, the very same people who put together the Amazon remake. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, there are reports that this entire team has been laid off. Hey there, Future Arkham here. I'm re-recording this whole segment because of some teething issues I'm having with my microphone, so I may as well bring this up here rather than later in the conclusion like I'd originally planned. There are a couple of articles online talking about the closure of Microid Studios Paris, but on May 19th, we got the announcement of the Syberia remaster, which has a scheduled release date of this year. It seems that despite the rumours, the studio might not be shutting down. At least I hope I'm reading this right, as another studio is also listed on the Steam page along with them. So the good news is we're getting a Syberia remaster, go see the trailer, get excited. And maybe there'll be one more Syberia video this year about that. I don't know yet, it depends on the timing. At this point, it should also be noted that Benoît did leave notes for one more story about Kate Walker to be made, so given that Amazon remake and now this are in the works, we may yet get to see the conclusion to this entire saga. I hope so anyway. Okay, back to our originally scheduled program. Lucas was in contact with Benoît almost every day, and he grew the story of the game out of the core concepts that Benoît put forward. Prior to his death, Lucas said that Benoît had signed off on the final script, and was very happy with the story they were telling. They were also very careful not to have the game slide out of its unique genre. Syberia isn't full clockpunk or steampunk. It's a slight sidestep from our world that switches around some of the names and places so that everything is at once familiar, but there's also enough room to slip in the fantastical. While The World Before is very much about the return of Kate Walker and the continuation of her character arc, it actually takes place in two time periods, telling the story of two protagonists, and it is one hell of a story. So let's take a bite out of it and look at the start and the setup. Fans of the first two games who felt the trademark Vorarlberg automatons didn't have a big enough presence in the third game are going to be very happy with this opening. Even from the first few seconds, we see a gorgeous little tram chugging its way down a very cute European street, piloted by one of Hans's inventions. We are in the music district of the city of Wagen in the country of Oosterthal, which exists somewhere in Central Europe. Much like the other fictional locations in all these games, Wagen is a kind of amalgamation of various different European cities that Sokal visited on his many journeys throughout his life. In particular, this place draws from Austria, Switzerland, Czech Republic and Germany, and it pains me to say I've only ever visited one of these places, and that was at a time in my life too far back for me to really remember much about it. Maybe if this YouTube thing really takes off one day, I can fix that. The year is 1937, and our new protagonist, Dana Rose, is on her way to one of the most important days of her young life. The weather is gorgeous, and the bloom lighting is a little excessive, but it's doing the job of presenting the player with a sense of magic and wonder that has always been the soul of these games. It is also tanking my frame rate for some reason, and I'll get around to that later. Stepping off the train and quickly into our character's shoes, we get to grips with a couple of UI elements, including the journal that can help bring us up to speed on what happened before, and also side objectives. These have been implemented in a you don't have to, but you'll get a little more out of the game if you do kind of way. And I actually got the achievement for hitting them all, so I recommend you go after them because you get more story, and more than anything, I'd say that's what we're here for, right? So that year, 1937. I think we all have some idea of the political climate that was bubbling up in the background, and how drastically things are going to change in Europe 2 years from now. So there's already a dark shadow cast over our narrative. Still, walking down this side street, we see that the demonization of other cultures, in this case Vulgarians, is already taking root in this part of the world too. Still, our troubled shopkeeper isn't one to let a rock through a window get him down, and we get to make a choice about what to write in the concrete step he's making for his shop. That is coming back later, isn't it? So with that little ominous detour out of the way, it's time to head to the bandstand for our real intro. And guys, it's a doozy. Returning fans need only take one look at the grand piano at the center of this crowd to know exactly who designed it, and have some idea that this is going to be a hell of a show. After setting a few things in motion, the music begins and oh my god, I was not ready for this. In an interview with Shack News, Lucas said that as a AA game, they really had to pick and choose the moments that were going to have the money spent on them. He said himself it was the opening cutscene of the first game that sucked him in, and he was clearly rolling to do the same here, and well, natural 20 motherfucker. absolutely mind-blowing. So from the distant past to the not so distant past, we head to 2004 to find out what Kate Walker was up to while everyone was playing KOTOR 2, Fable, and I was obsessively modding Morrowind, chatting on the old Elder Scrolls forums, and just getting started in 3D art. Oh damn, Kashern came out that year too. That is definitely a movie. Anyway, it's bad guys. Kate is now detained in a forced labor mine, and her journal is actually a collection of letters from ace detective Nick Canton directed to her one-time best friend, Olivia. You remember her, right? The superficial girl who, accidentally, wound up sleeping with Kate's asshole boyfriend, and then wanted Kate to be mad at her so she could clear her conscience.
Oh, Kate, you're gonna hate me! Please hate me!
It seems that post-Syberia 3, Nick wound up in the Valsenburg hospital for some months, and when he was finally discharged, the trail had gone cold, but a parcel from Olivia to Kate had turned up there. So Nick finally got back on the hunt and discovered Miss Walker was being detained in this mine run by mobsters and neo-Nazis. Incidentally, this is the only time that word seems to turn up in the game. I didn't read every journal entry, so maybe it pops up again later, but for various reasons the Sokal vs Nazis are the Brown Shadow, which is a not too subtle nod to the colours of their old uniforms. So Kate is fully reaping the consequences of her decisions. By abandoning her old life and cutting off everyone in the West who might have some chance of helping her, she's very much on her own. There may be people who want to look for her, but they don't have a hope in hell of actually finding her. So she's probably here for life, unless she can rustle up and escape. As we go through Kate's morning routine, we also meet her cellmate Katusha, and their interactions imply that going through hell together like this has created a bond that goes far deeper than friendship. Still, Kate's morning routine is thrown into disarray when their guard swings by with a package for her and gives her a chance to open it before they have to start their shift. The contents are about as bad as they could possibly be. There's a letter from Olivia that's no doubt arrived far too late that informs Kate of her mother's passing and is pleading with her to return for the funeral. There is also an open ticket to fly back to New York. Olivia has also enclosed Kate's mother's pendant, which is also an ingenious tiny little music box. The pendant is very important to Kate Walker, as she listened to it a lot when she was a child and has never been able to figure out where the tune came from. We even have at least one small flashback scene later in the game concerning it. Of course, Kate Walker isn't going anywhere, and the absolutely devastating news isn't going to earn her a day off in this slave labor camp either. And as she falls into despair, we are transported back to Vargan in 1937 to see what's next for Dana Rose after her magical performance in the town square. This section is something of an extended tutorial. While we should now have all the controls and interactions down, this is our first chance to really rummage around an area, talk to people, and solve a minor puzzle of sorts. The good news is Dana has found herself a part-time job, helping out in a mountain lodge out of town. She'll be using the money she makes here to help pay for her tuition fees for studies at the musical academy and take some of the pressure off her parents. It's also here that we discover the Roses run an art dealership, and that's going to be important information for later. And we can first learn about the Vorarlberg connection here too. Hans stopped by Vargan on one of his many adventures across Europe in the aftermath of an absolutely devastating fire. He personally designed the automatons to help with the rebuilding of the city and communicated back to the factory in Valladolid to have them manufactured and shipped over. The bad news though is the influence of the Brown Shadow and their scapegoating has reached a point where it's going to become a personal problem for her family. So we are rushed off back to Kate Walker and Katusha as they smash rocks in this dangerous part of the mine. Kate Walker eventually begins taking her frustrations out on the wall in front of her, and that is when things take a turn.
Kate, watch out!
Sorry, I didn't see.
Hey, look!
Well, isn't this interesting? As well as a handy motorbike that could get us out of here, We discover that this train is full of loot taken by the Brown Shadow from somewhere during the Second World War. And well, if you took the time to examine the paintings in Dana's parents' house, you know exactly where these things came from. Damn. I hope they all made it out okay. As we explore though, Katusha finds something that catches her attention. She's convinced that the girl in the painting is an absolute spitting image of Kate Walker. Our returning protagonist isn't all that convinced though. Still, with the bike repaired and some loot loaded up to make a clean break, they're almost ready to make their escape when...
Hold it right there, girls. All right. You've caught us.
This whole scene ends in quite a heartbreaking moment that sees Katusha getting shot, Kate braining the guard responsible before she can be throttled, and a very emotionally intense goodbye.
Kate, love you. Remember me, Kate. I'll close my eyes now.
So Kate Walker finally escapes her captivity and proceeds to ride as hard and fast as she can away from one of the worst years of her life, overwhelmed with grief for the loss of her mother and her lover. Let's not mince our words here. These two were in love, and that's a beautiful thing. Katusha making Kate promise to go and find the girl in the painting seems like the delirious words of a dying woman, but with nowhere else to go, Kate Walker decides to set this as her goal, if only to hide from the fact she's running away from the immense grief she's holding inside. Unfortunately, that kind of pain is going to be right behind her the whole way. Even so, our heroine escapes Russia and travels back across Europe to Vargan, where she begins to investigate the mystery of the woman in the painting and facing off against her real enemy, everything she's holding inside. And maybe along the way, being reunited with an old and dear friend one more time. The World Before is a tale of two women. One, a damaged and lost ex-lawyer from New York trying to pull herself back together, and the other, a World War II romance saga. I suppose everyone is going to have their preference here, but I honestly can't tell you which of these two narratives is better. They're both wonderful, compelling, full of interesting characters, moments that tug at your heartstrings, and they still find time to lighten the tone and make us laugh. They also both have some very powerful messages. On one hand, Kate's battle with grief and loss is something I think we can all relate to, and her story is one we can draw inspiration from. Dana's story, on the other hand, gives faces and names to the people who really lose during a war. By playing a Vagarian and interacting with them, we see these minorities used as scapegoats as actual human beings with lives and hopes and dreams of their own, who just want the same chance everyone else has, and not as a faceless threat that we can dehumanize, chase out of their homes, and strip of their rights and property because someone with authority told us it was okay to do that. In both Dana and Kate's time, we get to walk around Vargan as a beautiful city filled with clockwork wonders, reminding us that the real price of war and hate isn't buildings, businesses, or money, but actual human lives. The one thing that when gone, we can never get back. Which brings us all the way back around to Kate Walker and her own grief. Kate lost her mother while she was locked away in some Russian salt mine, run by criminals and neo-Nazis apparently. I mean, I thought there was some kind of official government regime, but you know what, I don't care. See, I told you that's how it went. As such, she couldn't be there for her mother when she fell sick, say goodbye before it was over, or even be at her funeral. Then she lost Katusha right in front of her eyes, when they were both only moments from their chance at an escape and a better life together. Kate is full of regret and loss now, and so are so many of the people in Dana's timeline. It doesn't start that way though. After all, if something is going to come crashing down hard, it needs to go soaring high first. So let's talk about a handsome and dashing man called Leon. The second chapter of the game takes us to a mountain lodge that hikers stay at while on long treks. One seemingly harmless piece of trivia we discover here, that's actually going to become really important later, is that there is currently an excavation of several dead bodies going on in the mountains. It seems that these people died in an avalanche during the Second World War, and their bodies were irretrievable and left to freeze in the ice. However, due to climate change, they've begun to thaw out, and an operation has been launched to remove them from the hiking trails. This place is presided over by an elderly woman with many bad memories from having lived through the Brown Shadow occupation named Demoiselle Lenny. She herself is incapable of using her legs on account of her resistance activities during the Brown Shadow occupation, and is wheeled around in another Vorarlberg-style automaton and is actually considered something of a local heroine, though she doesn't see it that way. She's the first person we meet who recognizes the girl in the painting as Dana Rose, and even says that she was here at the lodge when it was painted. This launches us into one of the first of the game's extended flashback sequences. It's here we learn about an expedition to find the Gorons. Yes, that was my first thought too, but no, we're talking about Yetis. And given this is a world with a fabled lost island where mammoths stomp around, I think it's safe to say they're actually out there. We also meet a slightly stuck-up photographer named Junta, and this absolute symbol of European masculinity named the Summer of Mark. Named Leon. There's a bit of a romantic drama here, so I'll quickly abridge it. So, Lenny is the daughter of the owner of the lodge, Herr Gustav, and is somewhat infatuated with Leon. Unfortunately, Junta, this seemingly stuck-up photographer lady, wants to monopolize all his time and take pictures of him in dramatic poses. Leon is training a group of scientists in outdoor survival as they prepare to head to Baltair, nope, not a real place either, but we get the impression it's in East Asia, to find the aforementioned Gorons, and the money for this is coming from... yeah... the things we do for science, right guys? Dana is working here to help pay for her tuition at the music academy, and essentially enchants the pants off everyone, in Leon's case quite literally, with her piano playing, and thus begins her passionate love affair with him, much to the disappointment of Lenny, though Junta doesn't seem to mind. Almost like her interest was strictly professional and maybe she's got something else going on. Leon wasn't actually supposed to be going on the expedition with the science boys, but as we discover from unlocking an elaborate puzzle chest and looking through some old film from back in the time, due to a last-minute injury, their original guide was unable to go and Leon was subbed in. Now, Leon is a genuinely nice guy. It's made very clear that he has all the potential to be a ladies' man and a complete scoundrel if he wants to be, but he's very serious about Dana, and is all in on coming back to be with her as soon as he can, which... I mean, it's 1937. I'm not exactly dropping spoilers if I say something like the world he's leaving behind probably won't be there when he comes back. And well, we've seen that train, so something very ominous is hanging on the horizon. And we know that loss is a huge theme in all of these games, so... yeah... The stage is very much set for our strife-filled World War II romance, and the potential for a very tragic ending. Before we dive into all those spoilers though, let's talk about a few other things. So, do you guys remember this? And this. And now somehow we're here.
Oh, Kate, poor Kate. Now you're on your own. With a train full of treasure.
How the hell did that happen, right? Well, Syberia has always told stories with more mature themes. Ending in loss and a yearning for things that once were are a big part of those first two games. The places we travel through are forgotten. The people we meet are full of regrets and longing, but within all that, there was still space for over-the-top villains, petty acts of vandalism, and light-hearted banter with our clockwork conductor. Now we have very serious personal trauma to tackle, and a family drama that's overshadowed by the coming war. That's not to say Syberia The World Before doesn't have its more light-hearted moments, but there is definitely a much more serious tone here, and much of that is focused on Kate Walker's mental state after being used as slave labor for a year, and then, at least from her point of view, losing her mother and her lover on the same day. In the first three games, Kate Walker is running towards something. While on a seemingly simple contract signing job, she received a call to adventure. When she first heard about the mysterious lost heir to the Vorarlberg factory, who was supposedly last seen somewhere in Syberia, she could have just cried uncle and returned to New York. Instead, she jumped aboard a wondrous clockwork train and rode it all the way to the edge of the world, cutting away a life that had suffocated her for so long in the process, and embracing the freedom that awaited her on the other side of that. Now though, things are different. Her adventure turned into a nightmare, and with the Youkols gone, she has nowhere to really go to. But the thought of going back terrifies her even more. She is actually quite open about this though. When talking to Lenny at the start of Chapter 2, she tells her about her losses, and even says that searching for the woman in the painting has given her a reason to keep going. She's grasping to a floating piece of wood in the ocean with a raging storm all about her. There are several places throughout the game where we can sit down and engage in a little introspection about the last year of Kate's life. Here she'll consider her journey across Europe and the emotional forces that have compelled her along the way. She even has a brief moment where she feels like she's talking to Katusha about her journey, one that ends with this line:
There will always be a train for you.
But there's more to it than that. She doesn't want to face up to the people she cut away or deal with the legal accusations leveled against her. There is an early scene where Kate is unable to sleep and finally calls Olivia. This happens after a dream sequence where we actually see Kate as a young girl and even get to interact with her mother for the first time. Remember, until now, she'd only ever been a voice on the other end of Kate's phone, and quite a sweet one at that. Even as she wakes up and goes to the phone, we can feel that this has been on her mind for ages. There's a section early on where Kate is checking her email and just nukes a bunch of messages from Olivia without reading them, almost like she's trying to avoid dealing with her. As someone who basically binged these 4 games, what happened between Olivia and Dan and how she went about trying to offload her grief onto Kate was still a relatively fresh wound. I hadn't forgiven her, and frankly, didn't consider her worthy of my energy. Kate Walker though, Kate's been through a lot. She's had time to think about this, even regret her decision to run after Hans's train while she swung a pick at the rocks in a salt mine in Russia. The tables have turned in many ways. There are actually 2 ways to handle this conversation, and I basically save-scum my way through seeing both versions. It doesn't go well either way, but far from Kate being the one with the upper hand, Olivia is the one wielding all the accusations now, and we can see Kate really isn't ready to have this conversation by the way she stumbles through her side of it. In the phone calls in the first game, we saw Kate casually referencing some of the absurd events she was living through in the phone conversations to people who had absolutely no context about them, and thought she was maybe going a little off the rails in the process, and that comes back this time too. I won't say Olivia doesn't have any right to feel angry. She doesn't know anything about what Kate's been through, and she got a first-hand look at how that affected her mother before her death. One other area that shows the extent of Kate's grief though is in the first chapter. Here, we are searching for the old shop where the painting came from, and discover it has changed owners and shifted from selling paintings to antiques. The shop owns a Vorarlberg automaton that turns into one of our first clockwork puzzles. Cracking it open lets us insert Oscar's heart into the mechanism, and guess who's back, baby? I am so happy to see you. What?
And Oscar, is everything all right? Oscar? Oscar, come back!
So it would seem there's some sort of programming conflict between Oscar and the hedgehog that leads him to run off and become lost, and just listen to this.
Oscar, please, come back! I need you!
That is some raw fucking emotion right there. God damn, it's heartbreaking. Now, if we jump ahead a couple of chapters, we do get our reunion as Oscar manages to become the dominant intelligence inside the contraption. And well, take a look at this.
I am glad to see you, Kate Walker.
Oscar, oh, I've missed you so much.
I say, this display of emotion is most unreasonable, Kate Walker. I do hope you don't plan such profusion every time I change bodies.
Kate has been clinging to driftwood in a storm, and now at least something resembling an inflatable dinghy has come along. It could still puncture and be lost at any moment, but it's a little bit of hope, comfort, and familiarity, and a sign that maybe this wasn't such a bad idea all along. One big difference between this game and all the others is that we aren't on some big rollicking adventure that spans multiple countries and locations. Rather, we are focused in one city, and we travel around its various districts, visit the mountain ranges that surround it, and dive into its history, with only a brief detour into the Baltia Mountains to discover how the expedition to find the Gorons went. This place is also very much alive too. The locations in the first game were almost like pocket dimensions containing memories of places, while much of the second and third game's locations had this far-flung, isolated feel to them. Baranor, on the other hand, was a ghost town on account of the meltdown. Vargan, however, is teeming with life. From the locals, all rushing around to go about their day, to the many tourists who come to enjoy the old world vibes and like hiking in the surrounding mountains. The whole area is loaded with charm that comes from its beautiful design and art direction and the best graphics this series has seen. Though, I'm not sure what the issue is here, but certain lighting effects absolutely tanked my frame rate, and my PC is well above the recommended specs for this one. I played around with a few settings, but nothing really seemed to do anything, so I just had to live with it. Still, they probably are going a little too hard with the bloom lighting in a lot of these scenes. I understand how it contributes to the vibe they're going after, but maybe dial it down a touch. So, how about a little tour? We begin our adventure in the Antiques District, an adorable little market area full of shops whose stocks of clutter have now spilled out onto the cobbled streets. I was dragged around so many places like this by my parents when I was a kid. Not that I really minded. They do have a mysterious treasure hunter vibe to them. Also, there is one small Easter egg here in this shop with this suit of armor. I wonder if that's the same model with updated materials. Without a doubt though, the Jewel of Vargan is its music district. Wow, the Bridge of Mist is pretty cool and is prominently displayed on the game's main menu, but I'm gonna give it to this place just because of all the automatons. There's something of a tragic story about this place concerning a great fire that broke out during a concert where many of the residents had gathered. The fire apparently surrounded the area and ultimately suffocated and burned everyone there, while the orchestra simply continued to play. I feel this story is supposed to be some kind of beautiful tale of passionate artists getting lost in their craft even as the world burns around them. Kinda like Buddhist monks remaining perfectly still in meditation while being burnt alive. But it honestly came across as kinda dark to me, especially because of this automaton violin player, who's kinda central to the whole story. She's supposed to represent the famous violinist who all the people had come to see, and the thing is, I could see her easily standing up one day and going on a killing spree around the city. When we come here in search of information on Dana, we are tasked with repairing the automatons and performing the piano piece one last time. You see, the music academy is all but finished at this point. There are no students, no money, and the sum total of the staff is a full one guy who, like most people we meet in these games, is lamenting the loss of a much grander past when he and the academy actually mattered. In true adventure game style, rather than just ask for money in exchange for his help, he sets us to repair the machines and play the Hymn of Vargan that sets the whole mechanism in motion and gives us a full replay of the opening scene, but with our girl Kate now front and center. That is, right up until something snaps in her brain, like some long forgotten memory resurfacing from nowhere, and she's unable to continue. Somewhat late in the game, for reasons I won't get into until we hit those late game spoilers, we are taken on something of a trip to the end of the tram line, to the cemetery found there. Our trip out to the mountain lodge is the first place things get a little whimsical, with Hans flexing the muscles of his mechanical genius to overcome the increase in altitude. The full extent of it comes into play, however, when... well, just see for yourselves, guys. Absolutely magical. Hard to believe this old man with a mammoth fixation left a legacy that can capture hearts and still surprise Kate Walker, even now. Still, I do find it rather creepy that the gates to the cemetery just automatically lock up on the clock with no human oversight to account for people staying late or losing track of time. Whatever. It's there for the game, and it was a fun challenge to overcome. Despite all this grandeur, the game is still created with its limitations in mind. As good as these environments look, we are not exploring some vast, seamlessly connected open world, and thank God, because let's be real, those mostly suck. The city is divided up into various little hubs, and we zip between them on the tram. For the most part though, we are on a linear path and aren't going to be revisiting places we've already been to, unless the story requires us to. I think there's something of a missed opportunity here, as there could have been hidden scenes or minor interactions that played out in certain areas, depending on what point in the narrative we went back there. Shadow of Destiny on the PlayStation 2 did this wonderfully. Being a time travel story that sees you rewriting the future by jumping to the past multiple times, there are tons of little variations and interactions hidden in there. Still, I also understand that adding these things in would have taken time and resources away from polishing the main story and interactions, and if the team didn't have those resources to spare, I wouldn't want to see this suffer for the sake of overreaching. It's just a way I think they could have done more with their world and encouraged players to go hunting through it if they had been able to. Since we're talking aesthetics, I should also comment on the massive upgrade we have here in the character models and animations. There's a lot more movement in the facial animations now, and while it sometimes does seem a little mechanical, I'd still take these over the frozen faces we had in the third game. Also, character animations in general are just smoother, and the controls much more responsive. I did have a small issue with Kate Walker's character model this time. I can't quite put my finger on what it is. I think her chin is either too long or just too sharp. I completely understand her looking older and a bit more battle scarred after what she's been through, but the change from the third game is just a bit too abrupt. I kind of want to try and extract the models into Blender and do a compare and contrast to see if I can figure out exactly what it was that was bothering me. Like, come on guys, it's not just me, right? I certainly got used to it by the end, and it's not deal breaking in any way, but it just bothered me enough to write about it and not edit it out during my read through, so here we are. Anyway, back to the town. A lot of what we see in Kate Walker's time is only really surface level. Vargan is now something of a tourist town, and while I'm in no way advocating for this place to be bulldozed to make way for progress and modern convenience, it's really all just there for show. I've only visited Germany once, and this was a high school trip that I've more or less blocked from my memory along with the rest of those 5 years. However, I grew up in the UK, and I've seen plenty of antiquated towns and villages there that share some of this aesthetic. I've also been to Rome, where I can recall places with similar vibes, as well as Quebec City in, Quebec? Oh, and a couple of years ago, I also visited Bucharest, and the old town there also captures some of what we see here in this game. Especially in how many of these old buildings are really just facades that house tacky tourist traps that sell overpriced coffee and cheap souvenirs. Not that I'm trashing any of these places. I don't want to completely ruin the illusion for all of you non-Europeans looking to explore our history and culture. They're all very charming in their own ways, providing you don't stick around for too long or squint when you look at this stuff. The best advice I can give you about anywhere you travel to is, as best you can, make local friends. Trust me, you'll have a much better and probably cheaper time. I'm still not 100% sure where I am on the modern narrative adventure game. On one hand, I can tell you that I think Telltale and David Cage style games offer the most weak source mechanics of more or less any game genre. You're basically watching a movie play out and occasionally pressing a button to make it feel like you're doing something. They'll try to imply that the things you do and say will have some larger impact on the future of the narrative, but the simple truth is, you're being railroaded the entire time, and the total output of those decisions will be minimal at best, and just total lies at worst. I mean, do you honestly think every time you got a message saying X character will remember that, or you got that cute balance has shifted pop-up in Dreamfall chapters, that you had actually affected the game? You don't think for a second that maybe absolutely nothing of value happened at all, and that maybe you were just being fucked with? However, none of that changes the fact that I had an absolute blast playing both A Wolf Among Us, the Telltale Batman game, and Fahrenheit. I saw them for what they were, but that didn't change the fact that they all had awesome stories, and I really enjoyed spending my time with... Well, Fahrenheit goes a little off the rails at the end, but it was basically a good game. Another example of games with minimal mechanics are walking simulators. I am a lot softer in my judgment of these because I don't feel like they're trying to trick me into thinking there's anything else going on here. They also do most of their storytelling through their environments rather than dialogue or exposition dumps. I'm kind of a sucker for games that just try to do a couple of things really well like that rather than, oh, I don't know, jam a pointless stealth section in there? Yes, I'm looking at you, observer. So as long as I get a good story out of it, I'm down to deal with a lot. But even so, games like this do leave me wondering if maybe we can do better. The previous 3 entries all had point and click controls, with controller support only being introduced as of the 3rd game. Since modern narrative adventure games are all built around controller support, I played this entire game with a controller from start to finish and never even realized that there were actual point and click controls. It was only when I was watching some interviews about the game's development that I discovered one reason for the game coming to the PC first was that they wanted to have the game optimized for point and click controls to appeal to the long-term fans, and then use the extra time before the console release to really lock in the controller functionality. And I'm happy to report that after going back and spending a bit of time playing this as a point and click adventure, it works just fine. All the controls are responsive, and the animations are smooth. The game still keeps fixed or tracking camera angles rather than just having an over-the-shoulder camera, but these almost never become a problem like they did in the third game, and the UI elements we see in the game world are far less invasive and ugly than those from the previous game too. It's very clear that this kind of feedback was something the team listened to and worked hard to lock down this time, and they absolutely nailed it in my opinion. I briefly covered some UI elements already in the intro when I talked about this journal. This is where you'll get your list of main and side objectives, though you can bring up a reminder of what these are with a push of a button. There's also a hint button that will see Kate Walker speak her internal monologue out loud and nudge players in the direction of a solution to their current problem. Not that it's ever really that hard to figure out what you need to do. The diary will also function as your inventory screen and let you inspect and interact with items found therein. Some items, such as this key, can be manipulated here and changed so that they can be used with the locks they're supposed to interact with. While our major mechanics are still conversations and puzzles, we are long past the time of long lists of topics that have to be explored from top to bottom to make absolutely sure you don't miss anything, and obtuse inventory puzzles that rely on hiding the objects you need in obscure places in the environment surrounded by only tiny trigger boxes. I also feel like we've made improvements on the third game's idea of having all the other characters essentially boss Kate Walker around through every step of a chapter, and making her feel less like a character with agency and more like everybody's puzzle bitch. As with the third game, there are less topics to cover in a dialogue tree, but each topic in turn provokes a much longer conversation, complete with cinematic camera angles and various events that take place throughout. I think this is fine. It's a nice compromise between having a big list of topics that you laboriously have to work through, and just watching a colossal cutscene like a Metal Gear codec call. I never felt bored or like I was waiting for the game to start again at any point during any of these moments. There are also enough places to visit and characters to interact with in a given scene that I felt like I had some agency in how the story was playing out, versus just watching a movie and occasionally pressing a button. It's the puzzles where this game really shines though. These are something of an improvement on the more interactive puzzles from the third, but they go a lot harder than that. There are two main types of puzzle. One is just a gamified version of performing day-to-day tasks. We get one of these quite early on, when we are trying to find businesses that could have been art dealers at one point. We are simply marking on a brochure with a check or an X which ones we think are suitable candidates, and then trying to locate them on a map of the city. There's other stuff like Dana making up a drinks order in her job and having to change one of the barrels in order to complete it. Or, just like in the first game, having to call a number. In this case, in order to get a truck moved from an area so that we can get at what it was obstructing. They do that one in A Space for the Unbound too, now that I'm thinking about it. Oh, you like adventure games? Well, here's a 2D indie gem of one that you should absolutely try. Oh, also, I found out in a Reddit thread that when using this telephone, you can actually call all of the phone numbers from the first two games, and Kate will have a kind of reaction to doing that. Great little Easter egg.
Bonjour, you've reached the Hotel Meritz. Unfortunately, we are currently unavailable. You can also contact us by going to our website or emailing us.
Hello, Hotel Meritz?
Reception here, can I help you?
I'd like to talk to Mr. George. He's a barman at your hotel.
I'll connect you with the bar. Just a moment.
Then there are the puzzles that lean into the light clockpunk aesthetic of Syberia's world. Hans's contraptions can be found all over Vargan, and you'll have to figure out how to crack more than one of them open before the game is over. One of the earliest of these is figuring out how to open a Vorarlberg automaton so we can insert Oscar's heart into it, and it's really fun. There's buttons to click, dials to turn, codes to figure out, and so on. This method is mimicked all through the game, with elaborate locked puzzle boxes being the meat of the puzzle work here. They have multiple systems to contend with that have different context-specific controls for pressing and moving things, and you'll have to swing the camera around them, focus in and out on various areas, look around for codes or hints, and slowly untangle the threads of this tightly knotted web to finally crack them open and feast on the gooey goodness inside. This method has a very tactile element to it. Rather than just finding the thing and pressing the action button, having to use the analog sticks and move them in circles or in different directions depending on the situation, gives an extra dimension to the interaction. There's just something about the feedback you get from what you see on the screen that really sells the illusion. When something was moving slowly, I found myself applying more pressure to the analog sticks, as though I were working against a strong resistance, even though there's no way it could have any effect. I know that the motion control craze is finally done with, but puzzles like this really show that you don't need actual motion controls to give your game a tactile element like this. And while the Wii had a few interesting standouts like Silent Hill Shattered Memories, it wasn't actually offering up anything that unique or special beyond the usual Nintendo suspects. These puzzles remind me a lot of The Room. Oh god, have you guys played The Room? I got the first for my Android tablet way back when I first moved to Japan, and I was absolutely hooked from start to finish. The game has no dialogue or exposition of sorts, just an environment that gets increasingly creepier as you work to unlock this oversized Hellraiser puzzle box. I really need to pick up the others in this series at some point. And one thing I will say here, since I've been talking down motion controls, is I think I got a little extra out of it by using a touchscreen to explore the puzzles this time. You know, thinking about it, it's been long enough that I've probably forgotten how to unlock the box at this point, so I'm about ready for another round. Now for an extra layer of depth, we have the time jump puzzles. In these situations, Kate Walker has obtained information, either notes or a journal entry from Dana, and is reading them to gain access to things she needs to know to solve the puzzle. This is represented by being able to switch to Dana's character and walk around the same area in her time, and see things that are no longer there in Kate Walker's time. In an early example, Kate is trying to access this elaborate clockwork storage box that she doesn't really feel like just taking an axe to. By reading Dana's journal, she's able to locate the hiding place of a key, as it's exactly where Dana left it years ago, and Dana can see various photographs in a dark room that are hung up in a very specific order to make a code for part of the lock. It's a nice enough touch. I'd give it a B-. Not a bad idea, but gets a little frustrating, especially at this part later, when you're trying to fix the Clockwork Orchestra in the music quarter. My guess is there are people out there for whom this kind of thing is really easy, but I just kept going cross-eyed and struggling to remember things I'd seen as Dana only seconds ago. Something about how I'm wired up just made it a little too disorienting. Still, it's a nice moment of mixing the mechanics with the narrative, and better than just having a piece of paper to consult in your inventory to solve the puzzle. As far as difficulty goes, I would say they've nailed the challenge level for people who are here for the story. These things aren't brain teasers that are going to leave you stumped for days on end and have you forgetting where you were in the story by the time you get past them, but they're not laughably obvious either. The only one that really stumped me was this one here, where I had to place the locations of various enemy troops on a map based off some intel letters that I'd read. Wait a minute. I know who this guy is. When it finally came time for me to resort to a guide, I discovered I'd only actually missed placing one of the markers, so I didn't feel too bad about crying uncle on this one. The game could have made it easier for me by telling me exactly which ones I'd gotten right, or worse still, telling me that I couldn't put something in a certain place, but I appreciate that they just presented me with a challenge and left me to deal with it. So overall, I'm going to declare these a complete win. I feel like they achieve what they set out to do. On one hand, they're interesting and challenging, and take advantage of the setting to justify their existence. There's also a couple of interesting quirks, like switching over to Rosa's or Oscar's point of view to solve a puzzle too, that add some extra layers to them. They present enough challenge for me to feel like I'm actually playing a game without blocking narrative progression by being needlessly obtuse or hiding important items in incredibly difficult to locate places. Could we do better? Maybe. But I'd say what we have here works very well indeed. So it's about time to dive into those endgame spoilers and see how they work with our game's themes and character development. Since this is a 2022 game, I feel that 2025 is just a little too early to assume everyone watching this video has already played it and is all in on hearing all about it, like with the other two. So just be aware that there is some good stuff to come, but you're going to get a much bigger impact going through the game yourself to get it. We've got quite a few plot threads to tie up here concerning Leon and his expedition, what became of Dana and her family, and how things went down in Vargan once the Brown Shadow had full control over it. I think we should start with Leon's segment because it really is the catalyst for all of the late game drama. Well, that and World War II. So Leon is out in his element, exploring the mountains of Baltair, but the science expedition led by this arsehole called Reinhardt aren't handling the isolation or sleeping rough very well. Also, winter is moving in, so tempers are starting to flare up. To top it all off, there's been no sign of the Gorons at all, and no doubt their financiers aren't the kind to accept, turns out it was just a made up folk legend as an explanation. Not sure what the Brown Shadow wants with a Goron, but maybe they've got their own version of Death's Head in the mix. Things look like they're taking a turn for the better though, when Leon stumbles across an injured Goron and sets about trying to help it. This is where the scientists show their true colours at last. While they seem like quite reasonable friendly types back at the lodge, they clearly don't see this Goron as an intelligent conscious being worthy of care and compassion, but rather as their ticket to a trip home and a payday. This leads to them locking the poor thing up in a cage. That night, however, the noise the distressed creature is making finally draws out one of its parents, and Reinhardt decides a dead specimen is just as appealing as a live one. The ensuing struggle ends with,
"But he's killed Berger!"
So with their meal ticket well and truly lost, the science boys gang up on Leon and tie him up with a view to drag him back to civilization, and blame the whole failure of the expedition on him, and get him tried for murder. Imagine 3 science nerds beating up on a jock. However, this guy Hort feels that they're going too far, and not only helps Leon escape, but also agrees to deliver a final letter from him to Dana. From that point on, Leon becomes lost in the Baltair Mountains, and given his minimal equipment and supplies, the chances of him surviving the winter are minimal, even for an experienced outdoorsman like him. Flash across to Vargan, and when Dana gets the letter, she's found passed out on the floor. This leads to the revelation that she's pregnant with Leon's child, and when it all comes out, her family decide on some rather drastic actions. 1937 wasn't exactly the kind of time where an unmarried woman could be pregnant without there being some kind of massive scandal, and a story was concocted to say that the baby, when born, will be the foster child of a missing relative. They just need to get Dana out of sight until then. So her father calls in a favour with another family, the Zimmers, and they have Dana whisked away to a sanatorium in Switzerland for the duration of her pregnancy. Kate Walker uncovers this part of the story when investigating the Roses' old house on the Bridge of Mists. This is where things start to get very real in general. Here's the thing, we all know that World War II and Nazis are bad. If you don't think so, then I'm afraid this isn't the channel for you. We all know that terrible things happened in both Europe before the war and all over the world during the war. We see memorials everywhere, we learn about it in history, see photos and exhibitions in museums, so we all know this was terrible and should never happen again. But we are also very detached from it at this point. Enough time has passed for the real cost of the war, that being the human lives lost, to become somewhat abstract. The power of stories is giving faces, even fictional ones, to the people who lived through this. Dana Rose isn't just a face in a photo in a history book, she's someone we've spent time with, whose story we've become invested in, and whose well-being we have become attached to. Her family are minor characters, but the fact that their plight affects that of Dana affects us in turn. If you're wondering where all this is going, well, it's because in this chapter we find out about the pogroms that left many Bulgarians dead, and we find the names of Dana's parents on one of the memorials. All of this happened while Dana was away in the sanatorium though. In Kate's time, Dana's old house is an upmarket souvenir shop, but we quickly discover that the restoration work done here is only skin deep. In fact, an entire upstairs floor has just been walled up, which is basically how we're able to access Dana's mostly preserved room, find her diary, and uncover the story of Leon and her baby. What we find in this part of the building though is truly disgusting, and I can't for a second imagine how anyone could commit this kind of action and still consider themselves the good guys in a conflict. I guess Joe Abercrombie had it right when he wrote, "No man capable of greater evil than the one who thinks himself in the right. No purpose more evil than the higher purpose." Now Kate Walker has been developing the slowly increasing sense that this resemblance she has to Dana is more than just a coincidence, and that maybe she's actually related to her. It's at this point though that she bumps into another old acquaintance of both Dana and Demoiselle Lenny. Frau Junta is by some miraculous coincidence staying at the same bed and breakfast as Kate, but now under the name Colonel Blake. In our first encounter with Junta, the story was being told by Lenny, who saw her as an old busybody monopolizing all of Leon's time, while, when we read about her in Dana's diaries, she's actually quite a nice lady who isn't at all fazed by Leon and Dana's relationship. This is also because she was actually a spy working for the British military. Her Austrian heritage and her status as a famous photographer enabled her to walk freely through brown shadow controlled areas and literally just take photos of everything she saw and take them back to Blighty. Not all heroes wear capes and carry assault rifles. What she's doing back in Vargan, we'll get to that later, though it's related to those bodies in the mountains we talked about earlier. But she's especially interested in Kate's little treasure hunt, and one look at her has her understanding why. Unfortunately, Yunta's got some bad news for Miss Walker concerning the baby. This is the part where we actually ride out to the cemetery, and it's one of the last chapters in the game. We are closing in on Kate Walker's last night in Vargan, and a storm is rolling in more than one way. At the graveyard, it's discovered that Dana's health deteriorated rapidly while she was at the sanatorium, and she not only lost the baby in childbirth, but was also sterile thereafter. When she had finally recovered, Yunta took her back to the UK with her, where she'd be safe from the Brown Shadow, and where Dana got to work helping the Allies. She's eventually given an assignment to help extract a person of importance from Vargan via the Usterthal Mountains, an area she's quite well acquainted with, and where we know a bunch of bodies from the war have been recently excavated in Kate's time. Well, this isn't in any way foreboding, is it? As she's working to make contact with resistance cells within Vargan, she sees something that catches her attention.
Edelweiss?
Oh, come here now, my pretty Edelweiss.
And that's all the incentive she needs to Tom Cruise her way back into the arms and life of Leon, who is now leading a resistance cell based in the Mountain Lodge, along with Lenny, who's been using this opportunity to cozy up to him, and Leon's new best friend, and the reason he survived a winter in the mountains alone with no supplies.
The Goran from Baltayar. Well, you've come a long way, Mr.
Ludwig Hardtack.
And our boy has built himself quite the reputation as a symbol of hope against the fascists as well. Frickin' Chad. Look at the way he smokes those cigars like he's Schwarzenegger. To get the last of the story, Kate rushes out to the mountains, even as the storm is just breaking over the town. She has to see the bodies for herself, especially because she now understands that Yunta is actually here to help with the identification. Sure enough, we uncover Leon. The ice preserved him almost like stasis, but neither of the other two are Dana, which means it's time to confront Lenny and get the full story. And long story short, I know, too late, right? Lenny's green-eyed monster reared its ugly head when she saw Dana and Leon reunited, and it ultimately led to her selling her people out to the Brown Shadow. In the ensuing firefight, Leon makes a move to extract the VIP, while Dana, Lenny and the Goran hold the front line. The mountain path is hit with ordnance which causes the avalanche, and that's the end of Leon. This immediately sends our boy the Goran into a full-on berserker rage, and it is fucking glorious. I am right there with you, bro. Let's fucking go! Yeah! Fuck Nazis! But that, as they say, is it. Well, almost. The aftermath has a few twists and turns to reveal yet. Lenny keeps her secret, and is widely regarded as a hero of Vargan, who helped the resistance fight back against tyranny and oppression. Her father, Herr Gustav, we discover, was also a traitor. It's never clearly explained what he did, but when asked about his recent absences, well, a few words imply a lot.
Where were you during the occupation? Lenny never mentioned it.
If you want to know, I was cleared by the military court, Dana.
I also went full Krogan on this piece of shit who was desperate for my attention and showed him my back. He's done. He isn't worth my energy. Not that anyone would mind if I removed his manhood in front of everyone here, but Dana is much classier than that. Despite everything, Dana, like so many who survived the Second World War, can find little solace in the victory when faced against the cost. She lost her family, her baby, her lover, and the world she grew up in has been reduced to rubble. Of course, we see that by Kate's time, the buildings and automatons that give Vargan its unique charm are all restored, but the people who made up the heart and soul of the place are gone. The idea that this place could be safe, secure, and happy is forever tainted by the evils of fascism and war. And so Dana Rose sets sail for America to leave this place as far behind as possible. And if you think we're done with Grand Revelations, well, we still have one more puzzle to crack open, one more letter to read, and one more flashback to see before we're all done. Dana becomes a concert pianist and tours all over the United States in the end. But as her age and the grief of her loss finally catch up to her, she receives another piece of information about her past. Her baby didn't die in childbirth. Dana was unconscious while she was in labor, and arrangements were made for the newborn baby to be handed over to the Zimmers as their baby. They raised her without Dana's knowledge, and she now lives in America as Sarah Walker. Dana goes to the Walker's residence to finally meet her daughter. At the time, there is some kind of party going on with various friends and family in attendance, including the Zimmers. But as Dana looks at her daughter for the first time, she realizes that she doesn't know this woman at all, that she has never been part of her life, and that nothing good could come from invading this space and turning her world upside down like this. And so she decides to leave and go to a place she thinks of as safe and quiet, where she can peacefully live out the remainder of her life. But not before she hears someone upstairs playing the hymn of Vargan on a piano, and goes to see who it is.
She was very studious and didn't seem at all surprised to see me there. She must have thought I was just another guest who had lost their way to the bathroom.
And that's the end of the trail of Dana Rose. Or is it? Dana's story is certainly over. Kate has found out about her real grandmother. It's a story of tragedy and loss and easily rivals her own. In seeing this through, Kate Walker has found the strength to forgive herself and let herself heal. It's going to take time, but she's finally ready to go back to New York and face up to the consequences of her actions. We have a very different phone call with Olivia this time, and as she and Oscar wait for the train to depart, Kate Walker once again receives the call to adventure. In Dana's letters, she discovered that after the war, Leon had planned to return with her and their Goran friend to Baltair and stay with the tribe there. A place far away from the troubles of the world. Somewhere to be at peace. If only there was a train going that way. Fate? Why the hell not? And in a mad dash that mimics the end of the first game, Kate Walker once again leaps aboard a wondrous mechanical clockwork train, joined by another strange eccentric companion who's also finally going home, and rides off to another adventure at the edge of the world. I wonder where she'll end up next time. The release of The World Before marked the series' 20th anniversary, and what a celebration it was. The game received an astounding reception. The Steam page shows reviews from official outlets giving it a solid 8 or 9 out of 10. The game currently sits at a very positive on Steam and has been well received by fans of the series and newcomers alike. They had set out to right the mistakes they made with the third game and produce something worthy of the series' pedigree. In the process, they achieved something thought by many to be impossible. They caught the lightning in the bottle one more time. This game's narrative carries it far beyond the sum of its parts, and given I have fewer complaints about this game than I did the originals, it's arguable they even surpassed those. Wait, no. Pre-rendered backgrounds always win. Sorry guys, better luck next time. Thanks for playing though. I do have to wonder what it was like for a newcomer to the series picking this one up first. This was clearly made for the fans first, and there are a lot of callbacks to the previous games that I think would fly over the heads of someone who hadn't played them. I think this is actually a big problem for many of these older, longer running franchises. 20 years is a long time, and there are people who play games now who weren't even alive when those first two games dropped. Though it does seem like the fans showed up for this one, though it's entirely possible that the third game and the hit the franchise took to its reputation as a result had a negative effect on sales. The world that the game released to was far different from the one we lived in when development started. Lagervet and his team certainly weren't looking to make any comments on contemporary events when they began development. They just wanted to do what the series always did and tell a wonderful and heartbreaking story. But by 2022, we'd had everything from the January 6th riots to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the rise of far-right political movements in various countries around the world. They may not have intended anything by their story, and you absolutely don't have to infer anything from it you don't want to. But telling a story of the very real human cost of these ideologies and the hate and violence that rises up around them can have a powerful impact on people. Seeing Kate Walker locked up in a gulag somewhere off the map and forced to slave in a mine every day, quite possibly until she dies for the crime of... Or watching as propaganda turns the easily manipulated into a violent mob who hate you for what they've been told you represent rather than judging you on the actions or your character. Seeing that from the perspective of the persecuted people, and even seeing those people as flawed and complex too, even in a work of fiction, it just makes things all the more real. This is why stories matter. We can go on a journey with people we might not usually associate with. We can understand their points of view without bias because, hey, it's just a story, right? We can see people who hold conflicting ideas to our own as complex creatures with a past and a reason for holding the views they have, rather than as a faceless enemy. As we become emotionally invested in those people and watch them go through their trials, it may very well lead to us questioning things about our own actions towards other people. Stories give us heroes too. Watching Kate Walker wrestle with her grief and slowly come to terms with it all through her journey as she uncovers this mystery and learns things about herself, it's inspiring. It can give us hope that maybe we can fight through our troubles too. The rule of show don't tell is important here too. Don't tell me the Nazis are bad because they hate things. Show me their hate in all its raw ugliness. Nobody told us Kate Walker is a strong, independent woman. In fact, when she shows up at the start of the first game, she's far from being that. Sure, she's educated and seems to have her career all worked out, but her relationships, especially Dan's, are very toxic, and she basically lets her boss use her as a doormat. Fast forward to the world before, and we've got a woman who's made some real choices with her life, had some experiences both wonderful and terrible, who carries some real scars, and has had to fight some real trauma, and even so, when she hears the call to adventure at the end, she rushes off, probably burning her bridges with Olivia for good this time, and goes in search of her heart's desires. We all have our heroes from our childhood. Those cartoon characters who made us want to be stronger, better, or do the right thing. As adults, I'm sure we've all got a variety of them from various media too. Kate Walker has never been the type to solve problems with her fists or a super shotgun, though there's a few puzzles in some of these games I would have loved to have taken a super shotgun to. Her greatest weapon has always been her mind and her curiosity. She's an adventurer and a tenacious puzzle solver. Even at one of her lowest points, she dedicated herself to solving a mystery and learning the tragic story behind a painting she found by complete chance. Likewise, Dana used her music to inspire others and her mind to aid the Allies in the Second World War. She was even willing to put herself in considerable physical danger despite not being some action hero. Given that the only way to resolve a conflict is either with our words or our weapons, I can't help but think that the world needs more Kate Walkers. We have the power to destroy our world and all life upon it, and I'd hate for this little experiment in complex consciousness to end that way. We need people who are more curious, more open, more accepting of others, and not easily swayed by propaganda that's designed to incite fear and hate. Those people are the ones who are best suited to fight the darkness now. Though, occasionally, we also need a BJ Blazkowicz to put the Nazis in their place. And that was Syberia. 3 incredible games and one that was kind of a miss. It's probably worth getting on sale if you really want to experience the whole story, just don't expect too much. So my love of stories and games with powerful narratives, philosophy, and especially conversations about identity and the self have led me somewhat into RPG territory again. During my spring break, I have a lot of free time, so diving into a bigger, longer game is quite possible. I'd promised myself something of a break from CRPGs after finishing Shadowrun, but only one game series later, and I'm being dragged all the way back down into old school CRPG world. So next time, we will be stepping into the shoes of an immortal with amnesia, travelling across one of the most interesting and bizarre RPG settings I've ever encountered, and asking the question, what can change the nature of a man? As we explore the narrative themes and philosophy of Planescape Torment. Hey, it feels like it's been even longer than usual. I've had a hell of a time writing this script if I'm being honest. Translating the raw emotion that a powerful narrative like this has on me into some kind of coherent essay takes a lot of work. You'd think I'd be better at it after a few years of writing these things, but nah. It always feels intimidating, and I always worry if I'm rambling too much or spoiling too much. So the script went through a lot of edits. I also started work at a new school in April, so I've had to factor that back into my life. This kind of led me to just retreating into Blender and focusing on that. It's kind of my safe space there, because I can slip easily into a flow state once I have an idea and play some ASMR in the background. Oh, I'm also playing through Baldur's Gate 3, which is fucking huge by the way. I want to have at least one full playthrough under my belt before I try recording for capture and making a video. So I guess I'm saying I've been a little scattered recently. Hopefully now I'm back in a good routine, I can speed up the production a little. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video enough to make it all the way here, then please remember to like, comment and share, and there are some real money ways to support the channel here. Until we next meet for our journey across the plains, I'll remind you to stay hydrated, stay cool, and take care of yourselves.